I've got to do a talk now, haven't I? This was a good idea when we were planning it, that I was going to present and speak about something to you. It's less of a good idea now after I've probably not slept for about 4 days, and I'm thinking, what did I write on this presentation last night at 11:30? We'll find out as we go through, won't we? The future of podiatry. And I chose the title because I can't really be wrong at the moment, can I? I can say anything I like, and there's no evidence base to challenge it, so let's go on a bit of a journey and see where this takes us. Without a doubt, we are a profession in evolution, and we always have been because we're a relatively new profession, aren't we? And things have changed rapidly, and things are continuing to change by the external, extrinsic factors. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Some of you know me quite well. Some of you probably never seen me before. Some of you have probably only ever seen me pop up on your Facebook feed with an annoying video promoting Osgo Live or something else. I'll tell you a little bit about me so you've got a bit of an insight as to who I am, what I'm doing, and what my beliefs are, and what all of this is about, really. So I came to podiatry a bit later. I know I only look 28, but I'm actually not. You didn't have to laugh quite so loud. So I've been in private practice immediately from graduating in 2008. And I had a life before that. I've done a number of things. I've been a prison officer. I've run a number of businesses. Quite varied businesses. And there's always been common things amongst these things. And this is what happens in life, isn't it? Is you collect skills, and it's almost like you can't trace the route backwards from where you can only trace the route backwards from where you start. You can never pick your path to get where you end up. And I'm sure we could all tell the same story. So when I opened my clinic in 2008, it was ambitious. Kind of what I like to do. It has to frighten me, otherwise it doesn't excite me. So I opened a multidisciplinary practice, and it was a large Victorian building, and I spent probably the first 2 years of undergraduate study doing my business plan for what this practice was going to look like. And I think my lecturers were impressed and terrified that I might actually go and do this. And they were like, don't do it, don't actually do it, don't do it. And I always fully intended to go and do it. And it was a challenge, it was an enormous challenge, but it's been rewarding, it's been massively rewarding, and it got me into a position where I could then look to do other things, where we employ lots of people, where we serve the local community, we raise the profile of podiatry, and it's nice to have a multidisciplinary practice which is led by podiatry. I didn't understand why it wasn't more common and why more people don't follow this route, but it was a bit of a leap in some ways. I'm also co-founder of Osgo, why I'm here talking to you now. And Osgo is a joint venture, for those who don't know. It's a joint venture with a pharmaceutical distributor. Europe's largest pharmaceutical distributor. It's hard to imagine how big these companies are, really. But they turn over £30 billion a year, this company. You just can't imagine what £30 billion is like. It's an enormous amount of money. So they're a great partner to have, which is always what I could foresee and what we could do with podiatry. If we were to partner with a company who had access to commercial deals, know-how, directors and assets that could be of a benefit to the profession, why aren't we going out there and doing that as a profession? The other healthcare professions do it. Why isn't it happening in podiatry? So that's a bit of a background about me and to what Osgo is at the moment. The other thing about me is, much to most people's dismay, I'm an eternal optimist. Everything's going to be better in the future, according to me. So how do we predict the future? There's a few ways. When you have a read of people's opinions of what's going to happen in the future, a common method is that people will look behind, they'll plot a graph, and they will then extrapolate. So you'll work out what things were like in 1950, what were things like in 1960, what they're like in 1970, and you start drawing a line and you can extrapolate and you get an idea where things are going generally. And yes, that can give you some indication as to what is happening. The issue with this is that when you look at something like a profession, there's so many variables, it's multifactorial, isn't it? There's so many factors at play. We have to look at all of these individual factors out there because we live in a time of great change, don't we? So many things are changing. We'll run through this list quite quickly as to what is changing. NHS provision is changing. It's changing massively. Population changes. So the population is increasing in number, and also how this population is made up and what this population looks like is changing. We get bigger every year, we get more diseases every year, we live longer every year, and we have more problems with our feet every year. So these changes have a huge impact on our profession. More recent change, undergraduate funding, huge change. And depending where you are and what you do, a huge threat, something quite frightening, perhaps liberating, I don't know, but an enormous change, because a large amount of us, why did we end up on a pod undergraduate degree? A number of reasons. The physio course was full. No? Just me? A number of reasons. There's funding in place, and that was always a carrot, and that always attracted people into the profession. So this is a big change which is happening. The other changes, scope of practice has been continuously developed for those who want to seize the opportunities. Entitlements to medicines, and I speak about this quite a few times because I firmly believe it's something that we can really leverage as a profession and something we can turn to our advantage in the future if we're smart about it and engage with what entitlements we do have and use them. It gets funny in a minute, those people leaving. I'm not going to speak too much about FHPs, but this is a change. There's an increase in number of FHPs out there and what's happening. And this other enormous change in the world, which is affecting everybody, no matter what industry they work in. We all thought the internet was going to change the world when it first really came along in the early 90s. And all it did for about 10 or 15 years was mean that you could watch kittens playing the piano on YouTube. Not a lot else happened, did it? We could send emails to each other. A real leap has happened in this ability to connect with people through social media platforms. Suddenly, through Facebook or Twitter, you have access to a database of other people who have similar interests to you, similar thought patterns to you, similar questions to you, and we have no idea yet what this means. Today would not be happening without social media, because it's a leverage tool. It allows you to spread messages in a way that you couldn't do with a startup company 10 years ago. It allows us to reach all of you and to reach where your attention is, because your attention has changed. Your attention is no longer watching what Gail Platt's doing on Wednesday night at 7:35, or if you are, you have 3 other screens going at the same time. Your attention isn't on that big screen anymore, which is very expensive to advertise on and very expensive to interrupt your attention. Companies are able to do this now with the thing in your pocket, which we're all glued to for at least 10 hours of the day. We are glued to the things. So it's been a huge change in the world. And it makes a huge change to our profession because we have the opportunity to project what podiatry is through this tool. It's like anything, it's a double-edged sword. We can also mess it up if we get it wrong, can't we? As some people find with their digital profiles. And I bet you've met some people today who you know through social media and you thought, I actually didn't like you on social media, but you're quite nice, aren't you, actually? Yeah, it happens, doesn't it? Because text. And Jonathan's laughing because he's probably had 10 people say to him, do you know what? So we look at the future. There's a couple of schools of thought. Is the future indefinite or is it definite? A definite future is one which we can choose our future worldview and allocate resources against it. An example of this is the United States in the 50s and 60s had a definite worldview that they could bring freedom to the world, that they could send a man to the moon. They had a definite worldview, and they believed that a future meant space travel, and it was going to be a real thing. And that wasn't necessarily a realistic thing to be saying, but they believed it with a definite worldview, and they allocated their resources to it. And it wasn't necessarily an easy journey, but they achieved incredible things on the back of this definite future worldview. And a lot of this is about sphere of influence and belief as to what your sphere of influence is. Who's going on holiday next year? Who's booked their flights for their holiday next year? Who's going on holiday in 3 years? Who's booked their flights for their holiday in 3 years? Why not? Dates aren't available yet. That's a good reason I wasn't expecting. What are you going to be doing in 3 years? What are you going to be doing in 3 years? Breathing oxygen. It's this unknown distance, the sphere of influence as to how far we can see. And we each have our own as to how far we're prepared to plan. Who booked this event 6 months ago? I know who did. I know who waited till 7 days to leave me thinking, oh my God, is anybody coming to this damn thing? Why don't you? Why don't you book it? It's so far in advance. And it's this idea of the future isn't definite, it's indefinite. Well, let's see what happens. And we say that lots, don't we? Let's see what happens. And this is almost a position where you think to yourself, let the future happen. Let the world happen to me, rather than putting yourself into control. Except for some things that you have a very firm belief in, or when the stakes are really high, and when success is the only option for you. Perhaps things like, which school is your child going to go to in 5 years' time? Some people will tell you exactly what school their child's going to go to, and we're going to move house so they get in this catchment area, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. So it's about sphere of influence, and a lot of self-talk is what guides a lot of this. So, realistic things. And I'm always interested when people tell me that things aren't realistic, because I do a lot of things which aren't realistic. But then nothing great ever comes out of doing things which are realistic. It's got to be unrealistic, hasn't it? If you want the future to be something exciting, then you need this unrealistic idea, like going to the moon, or like starting a conference for private practitioners. It was unrealistic when it was said, but you have a definite view of the future and you make things happen. So I like this quote by Peter Thiel, a PayPal founder. By definition, insert private practitioners, podiatrists instead of entrepreneurs, have a definite view of the future. If they don't, they should get another job. Absolutely. Have a definite view of what the future of podiatry is for you, and you've got somewhere to go. If you just decide and say, let's see where it takes us, and if we do that as a profession, then we let the extrinsic forces decide what happens to us. So what do we do as a profession? What do we do collectively, those of us in private practice? I think you always start with the end, and I think Jill had a quote from someone, start with why. Starting with why is why people want to do things with you. But you need to start with the end. You need to know what the end looks like. We need to know what the ends look like. What does podiatry look like in 10 years' time? If we were all to sit down between us and have an open discussion, what does it look like? Does it look the same as it does now? Are we richer? Do we all have really large practices? Do we all work for a chain of practices? I don't know. Is our scope of practice increased? Is it reduced? Is there 30,000 of us to look after all these bad feet out there in the world? I don't know, but we need to decide what we want podiatry to be if we want to make huge leaps with the profession, which can be done if it's our choice. What opportunities do we want available? And what does our desired future look like? And this is something that we have to agree between ourselves. And we have the tools to do it now because we're connected and we're able to do it. The way I see things, I mean it's true, it's just the way I see them, is there's two realistic scenarios for what happens with podiatry. There's a third scenario which I don't want to consider, which is that we become irrelevant and we just disappear. And I don't think that will happen because there's too much talent in the profession for that to happen. There's too many motivated people in the profession for that to happen. Who can tell me a name of a high street opticians, or optometrists as they call themselves now? Specsavers? Boots? Few, Vision Express, few names, okay. Who can give me a name of a national high street dentist? Who? Oasis? Okay. So we struggle a bit more with the dental ones? Where's the power of the brand with optometry? Is it with the practitioners? Is it with optometry itself? Or is it with Specsavers? Should have gone to Specsavers. Should have gone to Specsavers. So the power of the brand lies within the corporate entity which owns these huge chains and employs the practitioners to work within them. The optometry model. Optometry is doing very well. It's very successful. but the power lies with the large corporate change and these large brands. It's a bit different in the world of dentistry. The brand of dentists is incredibly strong. We'll speak a little bit about brands in a second as to what brands are. Practitioner-owned and group practices, and yes, there are large chains, but the name isn't very often put out onto the high street. With the exception of Oasis, really, you struggle to find anyone who's out there pushing a brand as a name for dentistry. They like their individual identities, and they keep their individual identities. When they are swallowed up by large corporates, they keep them separately. And if you have a look at the scope of practice, the working life of dentists, it's taken on a whole different facade, really. Not necessarily saying that that's the route that we should go, but we should be aware of where the power lies with the brand. And this is one of the biggest factors as to what can happen with a profession. So what is a brand? Your brand is what people say about you when you aren't in the room. That's my favorite definition of a brand. People think a brand is a logo. People think a brand might be a typeset or a font or a color. It's not. It's that taste you leave with people, that experience, that feeling, and the comments they will pass when you're not there. Their real honest opinion of you. And I talk about the brand of podiatry a lot because I think it's crucial to the future of the profession that we have a brand, first of all, and that it's strong and it reflects what we want it to do. We should control it rather than it be decided for us. So the first issue is, of course, it helps if they know who you are. If we go out and ask 100 people on the street out there now, what does a podiatrist do? How many of them will not know what a podiatrist does? If we go and ask 100 people, what does a dentist do? They all know, don't they? So it's the first hurdle is awareness on the most simplest level. And the commonality between us all is that we fix feet, and that is the commonality that lies between us. And it's difficult. When people's scope of practice is so varied, so developed, and they're so passionate about the things they do, the messages can become quite cluttered. And it's a noisy world out there. If you want messages to get out there, they have to be so sharp, so to the point, and they have to be repeated so many times that you feel like it is the only thing that you say. For me, the greatest thing we could do for our profession is to collectively use social media and all the other leverage that we have to say one very simple thing, probably for about 5 years. We fix feet. As simple as that. We would then have a brand in podiatry and we would own a space with it, which then gives a place for other things to happen. I wasn't going to become opinionated. I'm in danger of doing it. All right. So, too many people overvalue what they are not and undervalue what they are. And this is true. Lots of people think they aren't enough, think they're not doing the right things, and don't understand where the value lies. We keep feet on the end of people's legs. It's enormously valuable, what we do. We let people walk around pain-free. It's so beneficial to the world, what we do. We need to be screaming about it. We really do. We need to understand where our value is. And it's in a very, very simple place. And regardless of the type of your practice, it always comes back to the same things. So how do we get there? How do we make these changes? And how does the profession advance? And this is one of the things it needs to consider. There's two schools of thought with how you make a change and create something that's different or new. You can either design it, or you can allow selection to shape it. So allowing selection to shape things is quite a new way of thinking with lots of businesses out there at the moment, is that people are now shipping products that aren't ready, events that are not ready, ideas that aren't ready, letting it be tested by people, letting feedback come. And it's this natural selection of what works, what doesn't, that you end up with your second generation product, your third generation product. And this is how we end up with really good products. And it speeds up the process of ending up with systems and procedures and branding messages that work and resonate. And only when you get things that really do resonate or work, should you then allocate all of your resources behind them. There's a couple of things that need to happen. We need to change our thinking in terms of making mistakes, and making mistakes as a profession and how we push our messages out. And we need to share our failures with how we promote our profession and how we communicate with the public. And it's something that we're not necessarily good at, is sharing our mistakes, because there's an emotional cost, isn't there, to sticking your hand up and saying, yeah, I did this and it was awful. You expose yourself and you leave yourself open, and it's a difficult thing to do. I think also it's more difficult for people involved in healthcare because mistakes ain't good. And I think as a mindset, we are more unlikely to report mistakes than perhaps in some other industries. But the airline industry, mistakes, they're all over it. They want to know. They want to know about mistakes. This idea of black box thinking, this sharing of anything that goes wrong and this understanding of it so that it isn't repeated across the board. But to share ideas, we need to be connected, which is one of the tools that we now have. But we need to be open about the things that we're doing in our practices, the things that are working, the things that are not working. And we need to reduce the impact of failures so that we will allow ourselves to fail. By putting out messages to small sections of the public perhaps, and measuring what happens with it and understanding what the impact of that is, rather than pushing out a designed message perhaps for the entire profession that goes out on a... Imagine the difference between taking out a full page in a newspaper advert and saying, we're going to allocate all of the profession's resources to telling the public what we do, and we'll take a full page in the newspaper. If that message doesn't resonate, it's gone. The money's gone. All your resources are gone. But perhaps if you want to try 10 different newspapers with 10 different messages and you could measure each of them, you'd spread your risk and you'd understand which ones worked, and then you could bet heavily on the ones that do. Now, it's this generational thinking of ideas being refined. So the levers that we have available to us: social media, it connects us. It allows each of you probably have just on your business Facebook account at least a couple of hundred likes. Some of you over 1,000 likes. Each of them will be connected to another 100 people. And this is the game, how we can push messages out that we want to get out to the world. And we have our access to medicines. And this is going to be a bigger and bigger thing for the future if we can engage with the pharmaceutical companies to support the profession. So what future do we choose? And I think that's something that, as a profession, we need to decide. And we need to decide whether the future is determinable or whether it's just going to happen to us. I was going to end on a happy note, and it got a bit sad then, didn't it? Fantastic. So I won't ask you for any questions because I don't have the answers, but hopefully today has inspired you, motivated you, and given you a few different ways of thinking. And hopefully there's going to be lots of things you can take away to make a change to your practice. Please do give us feedback. Nice, open, honest feedback about all the things you liked and all the things you didn't like and what you'd like to see perhaps at Osgo Live 17. So thank you so much for all coming and seeing us today. Thank you.